giving up your time for today's session, using Language Tree 3rd edition to develop students' critical thinking and writing skills. This is the second webinar in our series of 3 Language Lab webinars that we're running this week. So yesterday, if you joined us, we talked about Snappy Sounds, our primary, pre-primary phonics series, and today we're talking about Language Tree. And today we're joined by Julia Sander and Leonie Bennett, the authors of Language Tree. So thank you very much both for hosting the session today. Some of you may have seen Julia and Leonie hosting our webinars before on Language Tree, so you may have seen them before, but if not, here they are. Do use the chat box to say hello and let us know where you're joining us from in the world. I can see that lots of people have done that already, which is great. Let us know what time it is, what the weather's like. Yeah, do use the chat box throughout the session to engage as much as you can, and that would be brilliant. And also, yeah, use it for any questions you might have too. Please do post those in the chat box. So the session today will run for an hour, and after the session you'll be sent the recording, the slides and a certificate. So everyone will receive that in their inboxes within the next 24 hours. So do check your inboxes with the email address that you signed up for the session with, and you'll receive those. So yeah, please do get involved and enjoy the session, and I will hand over to Julia and Leonie now, and I will speak to you all soon.
Well, good morning, everybody. I think it's midday in Britain, and I'm Julia, and my co-author Leonie is sitting on a screen close to me. We are delighted that you are interested in using Language Tree, and think some of you have been using it before. The purpose of this workshop is to take a look at the 3rd edition, which has got quite a lot of new features in it. Some of you may already be using the books, but we'd just like to tell you about these new features, what the purpose is, and then moving on to look at that very important subject of how to develop the students' skills through using Language Tree. So I'll now, as Catherine said, if you do have questions, please pop them into the chat box and we'll try and deal with them as we go along, or if we have time at the end, we'll take some of them then. So I'll now hand on to Leonie, who's going to tell you about the new features in the 3rd edition. So can we have the next slide, please?
We will. Yes, so the 3rd edition of Language Tree delivers the latest OECS performance standards, and we're going to begin with a big quick look at the new features. We'll be seeing examples of them in practice later on during the presentation. So there's more emphasis on listening skills, and including an appendix of text for the teachers to read aloud to the students. Creole transition, we had a lot of help from teachers and advisors in developing support for transition from Creole to Standard English. Much of the advice is in the teacher's notes at the bottom of the page, but from grade 3 we also include Creole texts for students to read. The opportunities for integrating technology have been increased, with suggestions for using videos, sound recordings, computer graphics, as well as word processing and internet research. And reflection on learning. Students are regularly invited to reflect on their learning, mostly by writing in their journals or using graphic organisers. For example, at the end of a lesson, students could fill in a graphic organiser which asks them to note 3 things I learned, 2 things I found interesting and would like to know more about, and 1 question I still have. There's now an appendix of graphic organisers in the form of tables, charts and word webs at the back of the books, and you can direct students to fill them in to help organise their thoughts, plan their writing, and as well as to reflect on their learning. At the end of each unit, there's an opportunity for formative assessment in the form of a page which is headed, "What have I learnt?" And throughout the programme, there's support for CPEA. There are book reports, project work, advice on portfolios, and at grades 5 and 6, There's also a CPEA text. A grade K and in Students Book 6, there are more significant changes, and I'll go through those quickly. So grade K, the student book now has a section on environmental print, and it has listening texts, as described before. There are activity pages, which can be used for formative assessment and self-assessment. And in addition, there are lots more suggestions for independent writing, along with advice for how to respond to emergent writing. In the Grade K workbook, there's a new 8-page writing section, and a similar writing section has been added to Workbook 1, although that's the only change to Workbook 1. Another change in the Grade K workbook is the order in which the letter sounds are introduced. They're now introduced. Well, they reflect the order in which the letters are introduced in Jolly Phonics, which is very widely used. Moving on to grade 6, the student's book now begins with a 16-page review section, which reviews the language skills which have been taught in previous grades. And the book ends with a 14-page revision section, which revises what students have learned in grade 6. And the book now has 12 extended teaching units, down from 18 in the second edition, and prepares for CPA, as I described. So those are the new features. And those of you who are using the third edition, I hope you're finding it, I hope you're enjoying it, and so are your students. Over to you, Julia.
Next slide, please. I'm going to take you through one unit, a typical unit, really just to show you how the units were put together, what we had in mind, and of course to comment on the integration that's involved, because every part of the unit fits together. So when you're teaching, we strongly advise that you actually go straight through a unit rather than picking it apart and doing it piece by piece. And it's a standard pattern for the units right throughout the series, with the exception of the kindergarten. Even in grade 1, the units follow the same pattern. Now we start with a short opening activity, and that could be something called Let's Talk or Listen Up, which is just an introduction to the unit, to the theme, and also allows your pupils to draw on their prior knowledge. This is intended to take just a few minutes at the beginning of a lesson, not to be not an exercise which lasts a long time. Following that, there's a reading comprehension, and you will see we have various signposting in that, pointing out this is a story. This is the first unit of grade 1, the first unit of grade 5, excuse me. And at the bottom, you can see how there are on-page notes for the teachers. Can we have the next slide, please? Right, this is the second part of the comprehension, and it's followed by questions, and we set the questions at different levels. I don't know if you're familiar with the depth of knowledge terminology, but it starts from a sort of basic question leading into something that involves inferring. Next page, please. Right, as you see, there's also linked to the comprehension exercise. There will be something about, in this case, a story. So the students learn about narrative composition, how stories are made up, and then they have the chance to fill in a story plan based on the story that they have just read. And you will find in other units where you have an expository text, you'll have a relevant exercise about how an expository text is written. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, the speaking and listening, this is something that we have increased because the previous edition, edition 2, did not have any designated listening exercises. So this happens in a couple of ways. I've shown you the page from the student's book, and in the right-hand column is a text which is taken from the back of the student's book, which the teacher would read to the class. and they would listen to that. But we also recommend using the first part of the story as a listening exercise. So that also can be used to develop students' listening abilities. And there's some questions asked on the listening, and then that follows with a discussion. So the speaking and listening is closely linked. And as the unit is based on stories, narratives, the theme here of the speaking and listening is all about stories. What kind of stories do you enjoy reading? Why do you enjoy them? And so on. So can we have the next one, please? Right, this is where we come into the language section, and that language section really is grammar and punctuation. This is all focused on nouns. There's exercises in the student book. We find that teachers like to have a lot of additional practice for all the grammar points and the language points. And if we put it all in the student book, it would be so heavy, the pupils would probably not be able to pick it up or carry it around with them. So we put extra support in the workbook, and you'll see an arrow pointing to where it says WB5, page 7, and that will show you where you can find exercises on common and proper nouns in the workbook to back up your teaching. Can we have the next slide, please? And this, in fact, here is the page that you would find if you look in the workbook, and you can see practice page on common and proper nouns, which supports what they've learnt they've been practicing in the student book. Yeah, can we move on to next slide? The language section is followed by a word work section, which is really all about, as it says, words. It covers spelling, syllables, vocabulary development, things like synonyms, antonyms, homophones, etc. And here we've got something on a noun phrase. So you will see that everything is based on the language, and the vocabulary work here are linked. And we're also using a link to the text that they read. The text was called "A Lucky Escape," so we're showing that as a phrase. That's a noun phrase. Can we go on, please? Now, finally, we come to the writing exercise, and again, you will see how it's all based on the same theme of a story. They've read a story, they have worked out the story elements, they've discussed stories they like, and the final exercise is to come to plan a story and to write a story. So here they're writing about someone who was trapped by a flood. The reading exercise was about somebody who went out to sea in a boat and found it difficult to come back. So the topics are a bit similar. They're asked to brainstorm ideas for the story and to complete a story plan and then write a first draft. So I think you can see how important it is to work through all the exercises before that, the comprehension, the language, the discussion, the story elements, before you actually come on to this writing exercise. Writing is I think, pretty much the part of the course that the students find most difficult, but we give them a lot of preparation in the units as we go along. Right, so I think we're now going to move on to the next section. And, oh, I'm sorry, I missed out one crucial point. That at the end of each unit, we have provided a page of formative assessment that you as teachers can use, maybe take one lesson just at the end, and it covers briefly all the points that have been covered in the unit. And it will allow you to assess how well your students have performed, how well they've grasped what you've taught them, and any sort of remedial work you need to do to make sure that they've grasped the material. Okay, so I think we're now moving on to talk about skills. So if we can have the next slide, please. I'm going to talk briefly about planning, because if you're familiar with the series, you'll see that we have some help with that at the beginning of each book. You'll find a table of contents. Now, this is for grade 3. And if you glance at that, you will see that in the purple font, you have the different text types which are covered. And as you can see, there's a very broad range of texts included in the book. So can we have the next one, please? We only need to look at this very briefly. Every book from the grade 1 book onwards has this scope and sequence at the beginning, which sets out the skills that you'll be developing in your students: reading and comprehension, speaking and listening, language, word work, and writing. So you can look right across the columns and see what is it in each unit, which will help you when you plan your scheme of work. Right, I think we're now going to move to comprehension.
Yes, I'll just add one thing, which is that the 3rd edition of grade K also has a scope and sequence chart.
Oh, does it?
Sorry, it didn't in the 2nd edition.
Ah, yeah.
So, as you know, the reading passages cover a variety of different text types, and I'm just going to show a few quick examples to refresh your memory. So this one here, we've got a poem at grade 2. Next slide, please.
Were you going to point out the CR on that?
I'll point to. I'm going to do that later.
Okay.
Well, in another context.
Was it Larry? But
Sorry. And we've got non-fiction here. Text about a mongoose. Photographs are also important to non-fiction. We'd use artwork in fiction or other texts. Next slide, please. And we've got a recipe here with, if you see, there's a blue square there, and that's pointing out the features of the text, that what do instructions contain, a list of things you need, a sequence of simple commands, etc. So this, we're always pointing out the features of the text because it's important when you come to writing to know the format of the text you should be writing. Next slide, please. And here's a play. And again, with this, we're explaining what the features of a play are. We've got the list of characters and the names of who's speaking, etc. Next slide, please. But I want to look at critical thinking skills, which are built into language tree comprehension work right from the start. And we're talking about comparing, contrasting, organizing and classifying both visual and written information. And these skills are really important for today's students because it means that they're learning how to analyze and evaluate texts and form their own judgments, which, you know, I'm sure you'll agree with. Information and misinformation, it's more than ever important for them to learn this. But you don't need, or we don't need, a complicated text to practice critical thinking skills. In this story from grade K, a hat maker has, he's going to market with a lot of his hats to sell, and he decides to sit down and have a sleep, and when he wakes up, all his hats are gone. And although the printed text is very simple, the teacher's note asks students to make inferences, to identify cause and effect, and to express their opinion. So you can see it, or you may not be able to read it, but it says, how does the man feel? How can you tell? And that would be by the expression on his face. Why does he feel that way? He's got no hats and he's not going to have any money. And so we're asking them to draw attention to cause and effect. And then we're asking them to speculate. Where do you think the hats are? Do you think the man was silly or sensible to go to sleep? And there we're asking them to use their own judgment and to say what they think about the situation. Next slide, please. In this slide from grade 4, students are asked to think critically by analysing 2 poems and then saying which they prefer and, crucially, why they prefer it. The poem we're looking at is in Creole, and the CR icon at the bottom of the page draws attention to this. One of the things it does is ask students how they'd say one of the lines in standard Jamaican English. And it then invites the teacher to compare the verbs in the poem with the present continuous verbs as they're used in standard Jamaican English. And this is an example of the integration that underlies the whole approach of language tree. Grammar points rise out of the comprehension text, and they're not studied in isolation. Next slide, please. Here are the comprehension questions which follow a text in grade 4, and it's for the teacher to decide whether or not comprehension questions are dealt with orally or in writing. But I think probably a mix of the two, and at all grades, students will benefit from discussion because they hear other teachers, they hear other students' ideas and the way people are thinking. And also talking the questions through means that you, the teacher, can demonstrate how you work out a response to a question by thinking aloud. As you see from the signposts on this page on the right, we suggest using the technique of QAR, question-answer relationships, to, it encourages and helps students identify what they're doing in their critical thinking. It's pointing out that the answer to a straight recall question at the top is right here, so it's explicitly stated in the text. The answers to some other questions are in the text, but the student has to think and search for them and make inferences. And so we've got think and search on the right. And there are some questions where the reader's on their own or working in conjunction with the text and is asked to express their own thoughts and feelings. Next slide, please. Comprehension questions, as I've said, often draw attention to the features of the text. For example, getting students to think about the difference between a set of instructions and a poem, as here. And this page is from Students' Book 2, and it asks why are the instructions numbered and why are diagrams useful? So students are asked to work out for themselves why different types of writing use different formats. The page which follows this one asks, in what ways are instructions different from the poem? And again, it's getting students to make comparisons, to analyse the text and to work out for themselves what are the features of different text types. Next slide, please. To help your students respond to text in a structured way, you can use a graphic designer like this one from grade 6, which guides them through reviewing a text. And as with all the graphic organizer, I said graphic designer, I meant graphic organizer. As with all the graphic organizers, they can be used with any text. So this could be used with a magazine or a magazine article or a notice on a notice board even. So now we're going to move on to writing.
I think we've got to do speaking and listening first. I was just going to comment before I start talking about speaking and listening. I have seen a very interesting question in the chat, which I deal with quite quickly. There's a lady, I presume it's Jamaica. Is it Vivian Ramsey? She said that she would love to see a direction map in language arts as a component of language tree. For example, on which street would you exit the police station, or which building is next to the post office? This is called visual literacy. I think we do cover visual literacy in the course. We haven't actually shown any slides where we do that specifically, but every comprehension text has some pre-reading questions, and they very often ask students to identify what's in the picture and to predict from that. We've also got units where we have maps and plans where students have to say what building is next to another one or a route they would take to go through the town. So it is there, though we haven't actually highlighted it in this presentation. We are aware it's an important skill. Right, I'm going to move on to speaking and listening, which follows the comprehension, and that is based very much on what students have met in the comprehension text. But prior to that, we have another opportunity for speaking and listening that comes in the Let's Talk or Listen Up section that comes at the beginning of the unit to get students thinking about the theme and using what they know already and communicating, just raising their interest. So I've got some Let's Talk from grade 3 to give examples. What kind of games do you play when you're outside? What do you do when you can't play outside? So this is leading into a text about leisure time activities. The next one down, what kind of books do you enjoy reading most? Why? Where would you go to find out information? So I think this leads into a reading comprehension about using the library. And then the final one on the left-hand column, this leads into a story. Who is your favorite story character? What are some of the things he or she does, and why do you like this character? So that just gets the students warmed up to start the unit. Now, some of the units have something called Listen Up, which again is a short introductory exercise, and that's in the right-hand column. Listen to your teacher, answer the questions. And it's a description of Kirani James, the famous athlete, as you will see, because I provided the text directly underneath. And the students ask, what did you learn about the person your teacher described? Would you like to meet this person? What questions would you like to ask him? So it's an introductory exercise just to lead into the comprehension and get students thinking. So can we have the next slide, please? Here is the speaking exercise. Some of the units have both speaking and listening, and some with a listening text. Listening texts, as we said, are at the back of the book for the teacher to read. Sometimes it is just a speaking exercise. In this case, it's a grade 3 exercise, and you'll see a little green symbol at the top left, which indicates it's a group work. And the students get in groups to plan a school cleanup day. They have to talk about what they plan to do and fill in a web to guide them. And this follows a comprehension about the story where students had a litter problem in their classroom, and they decided to make plans for a cleanup day. We didn't hear what their plans were, so this is a follow-on from that. And then the second point is to the students have to tell another pair of students about their plans. I think it's very important, and we put it in every time, is that there should be an outcome from a speaking and listening exercise. If students have to discuss something, they have to have an outcome, and this is just telling people about their plans, or it could be, put down 2 points from your discussion. You'll see another outcome in the next. Go to the next slide, please. This is a much more developed exercise. It's a grade 5 exercise, and as you can see, it's based on a story. If you look in the right-hand column, Unit 8, there's a story about Compere Rabbit, who is a lazy animal, and he wants to have a rest without any of the other animals getting suspicious, and he jumps into a well and can't get out. And we put the little red mark at the top of that, which says CR. It's very small, but there's Creole transition. So we would suggest that if you read the speech out, when you read the listening text out, you actually change the speech between the animals into your form of Creole, which provides an interesting point, because then you can discuss whether it will be more natural to use Creole in this situation or standard English. And the first part of the page is student responses to what they've heard. And then the second part is based on story writing, because they actually have a planner, a fishbone organizer, where they plan the story as they've heard it. And then they have to retell it in the correct sequence using the planner, the fishbone organizer. And they have to give an end. They don't hear they have to work out how the fox, the rabbit leaves fox in the well and goes away laughing. And we ask the students to finish the story by saying how the fox got out of the well. And then the final outcome of that is that students choose a story that they know well, and they plan it on a fishbone or a story chart. And then the outcome is that they retell their story to another student. And the student who hears it, there's some peer evaluation as well, because the student who hears the story makes some comments. And you'll notice that on this page, and you'll see this throughout the book, we've got these little blue squares with a little turtle giving some advice. And we have these tips running throughout the book to give students some advice. Right, can we have the next slide, please? Right, just a couple of other examples of speaking and listening exercises. The one on the left is about the 5 senses, and it follows reading a poem. And on the right-hand side, we actually have a poem in Creole. It's in Jamaican Creole, so it will be quite interesting if you are not in Jamaica to look at that and compare that to your local Creole. And you can have a discussion about, try putting some of it into standard English, and then the students can compare how it sounds in standard English or how it sounds in Creole, because I think this is important in letting them value their own home language. Right, I think we're ready to move on to language. That's still me. Right, writing is going to follow. Right, obviously language is something that students find tricky. I mean, I think teachers equally, any teacher will say that they teach a grammar point and the student gets the exercise right. And then when they start writing independently, they find that they make a mistake. What they've got right in the exercise, they no longer get right when they write independently. And that is, it's difficult. So there's no easy way around it. But I think the way we've done it in Language Tree, and is I think I recommend, is to start with a basic manipulation. We always start with a rule, and this starts with present tense, telling us what usually or currently happens. And then students have an exercise. The first exercise is basically putting it together in a sentence. Monkeys live in trees, and so on. And then the next exercise is when you have to add an S to the verb. There's a note about it. Again, in exercise 2, the students are not having to do any transformation. They're just writing it down. By the time we move to exercise 3, that's moved up to a different level of thinking, because they now have to think, Auntie do use live or lives for Auntie and the red house. Equally, 2 girls, you're going to use live or lives in the big house. So we have a progression in grammar exercises from just repetition into using the language more independently. Can we move on from that? Right, this is now grade 3. The previous exercise was grade 1, and this is an example of how you can use one of the comprehensions to develop language skills, because the Steel Band Jump Up poem is a poem that uses a lot of present participles, even the present continuous. I'm dancing, tracking the beat, and so on. So when the students start language work on present continuous, there's a rule at the top to say what is happening now. We add ing to verbs. We use am, is, or are. And then the first thing is to look back to the poem, find 3 more verbs ending in ing in the poem. And then they start using the helping verb, am, is, or are, in exercise 2. Can we move on to the next page? Note the progression here, because now they're having to do something more difficult. They are having to put the sentence together. They are given the verbs in the box, but they have to combine it with what was the girl, the boys, and so on, and the correct helping verb. The next exercise actually is a very routine exercise on spelling the present participle. Sorry, and finally we come on to a poem where the students have a little bit of freedom to write the exercise and to use the present continuous in context. So note the progression from a simple exercise at the beginning, identifying examples of the present participle, then using the helping verb, and then finally coming to making little sentences with verbs in the poem. Right, can we have the next slide, please? Right, this is a grade 5, so it's obviously much more complicated, and it's the present perfect tense. And in the information box at the top, you'll see that you have the rule given you, plus it's actually referring to the story. It's a story about a fox getting some fish. And then first exercise takes you back to the present perfect tense, find examples in the story. It's used repeatedly in the story. Quite a simple exercise following that is using the correct helping verb, has or have. Then they move on to forming past participle. In exercise 4, they have to write complete verbs, helping verb and past participle. And the final 3 exercises, actually, they use the present perfect on their own independently, writing sentences. They start with an oral exercise. Have you ever been to the ocean? Have you ever seen a whale? And yeah, you work with a partner and write sentences about what your partner says. Exercise 6 is writing sentences based on a table, again using the present perfect. And the final exercise, write 3 sentences about things you have done often and 3 about things you have never done. So working from a basic level, using the correct helping verb, forming the past participle, it progresses to writing sentences independently. Next slide, please. Right, we're over to writing.
Writing. So I want to show how writing in a range of texts is supported throughout the programme. I mean, we've seen how everything builds up to the writing. The writing comes at the end of the unit, and how important it is that they've done the reading, they've done the grammar, and then they can put all this into operation in a writing task. So I'm not sure, I think I did mention that at grade K, we've done a lot more to encourage independent writing. And we suggest that students are encouraged to record their ideas according to their ability. I'll read out the teacher's notes because I think you can't read it. But so on this page, where as you can see, Nancy's come to the door and the children open the door. Students begin by working orally, talking about the picture, how the characters felt and what they said, and also to predict what happens next. Then they're encouraged to write their ideas, and the teacher's note suggests what the teacher might look out for. It says, if there's still emergent readers, look out for an understanding of which letters represent certain sounds. So you're looking for the initial steps towards writing, but not insisting that they get it right. And it also suggests that the teacher encourages pupils to leave space between letters and between letter clusters. So things that, that the students are beginning to understand from their reading and from being read to, that letters come in clusters which make words. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, I just want to mention a teacher's note that was from a subsequent page in the student's book, a subsequent page to the one we just read, which was that accept and praise pupils' attempts at writing. If they scribble to convey a message or to draw letter-like shapes, ask them to tell you the message or to read their own writing. Allow pupils to use invented spelling. So we're recognizing the steps on the way to becoming a writer, a physical writer, that is. And the writing process, which is getting ideas, planning, drafting, revising, editing, that's the scaffolding on which all of language tree writing tasks are built. And here we can see a simplified version of it at grade 1. So having read and discussed animal facts on the previous page, students are taken through the steps leading up to writing their own information text. And they begin here by getting their ideas, by drawing a picture. And then they make notes. And finally, they write sentences. And here again, Language Tree is providing you with a model which students can actually use to write about any topic. So once they've done this for their animal facts, it could be done again for a completely different topic. Next page, please. Next slide. And here's the writing process at grade 2, where it's supporting students through the stages of descriptive writing. Again, the first stage is getting ideas, where students talk, and again, we've got pair work. Students talk about the place they've decided to describe. They're then shown on the next page, at the top of the next page, how to make a word web to record their ideas before being taken through the stages of drafting, revising, and proofreading. And revising here and elsewhere includes peer editing, where students read their first draft to a partner and ask for feedback. You'll see that here there are also checklists for both revising and proofreading. So on the revising checklist, when they're working with a partner, they're either asking their partner or they're asking themselves, have I used words to say what I saw, heard, smelt, touched, and tasted? Have I used lots of adjectives? Are my sentences clear? And then below is the proofreading text checklist. Next slide, please. Students are usually asked to write the same type of text as they read at the beginning of the unit. The comprehension questions which followed the reading will have prepared them by looking at the text features, as we saw. And these are the features that they're going to use in the writing task at the end of the unit. Here we've got story writing. Now, if they read a story at the lower grades, they might be asked to identify the beginning, middle, and end, and to use those story elements when they're planning their own story. At higher grades, as here, they use a more sophisticated story elements in their planning, looking at setting and characters, and also at the plot in terms of problem, events, and resolution. Next slide, please. Pair and group work happens right through the programme, as I've said, and here near the end of Students' Book 6, students are taking through the stages of a group project. And of course, this is also important to CPEA. And it's going to involve research and presentation of their ideas to their classmates, or to their group rather. Earlier in the unit, in the listening and skills section, students were asked to discuss and agree. They had to come up with their agreed rules for group work about listening to each other, not interrupting, things like that. And now they're being asked to put those guidelines that they developed into practice in their own group project. You can see 2 IT icons on this page. They're the laptops with the little or iPads with the little hands. And they invite students to use technology to enhance their work, their project work. One encourages internet research and the other one electronic collaboration between members of the group. Next slide, please. This is an example of the writing process supporting poetry writing. It begins with brainstorming, and then it uses those notes and a writing frame to write a poem. In the IT icon, it suggested that students do their revising and their editing electronically. So these IT suggestions, they're not mandatory. If you don't happen to be able to do them at that time, it doesn't interfere with your doing the work or the writing, completing the task you've been set. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the writing. No, I missed that. Sorry. Can we go back to the previous slide? I'm sorry. Thanks. It's worth noticing that the poem they're asked to use to write rather, uses the present continuous tense. And that, again, it's reinforcing the grammar focus of this unit, which is another example of how the skills work is integrated and not taught in isolation. Next slide. Here's a graphic organizer from the end of the book. Several of the graphic organizers in each of the appendices support planning. And as the graphic organizers aren't specific to any single activity in the book, they're a great resource because your students can use them to help with any writing task. This page could help students get ideas for and to plan a report, a letter, an information text, or a piece of descriptive writing. Next slide, please. We're now going to just look very briefly at how the links to the workbooks function, although Julia has already looked at this briefly. They're signposted with these, as you can see on the student's book on the left. There's an arrow at the top left. And the reason we do this is because the workbook itself is organized into skills sections, such as phonics, language comprehension, and writing. And the students and the books practice all the concepts that have been taught in the student's book. And to make it easier for the teacher to find the appropriate follow-up or homework task, there are call-outs in the student's book margin. So on this one, the student's book is teaching the present perfect, and the workbook page signaled is page 46, which is there on the right, practicing present perfect verbs. Next slide, please. And it's not just grammar that's being reinforced in the workbook. Here in Students' Book 6 on the left, students learn how to create convincing characters by describing what the character does and says, as well as what they look like. And at the top of the page, it's signposted to page 176 in the workbook, which we can see there on the right. And this builds on what the students have done by offering a different way of exploring and describing a character. By the way, the teacher's note at the bottom of the student's book page on the left, we've got suggestions for working with students of different abilities, and also advice on students using Creole in their stories, where we suggest it's only appropriate in direct speech. And now I'm handing back to Julia.
I've noticed a couple of questions in the chat from Vivian, which I just deal with quickly. I'm moving on to the last part, which is about assessment. But I noticed Vivian is asking about a question: could we put everything in one book, because there's some confusion between having a student book and a workbook as separate volumes. I think the answer to that is that if we were to put all the exercises in the workbook in the student book, it would be absolutely massive, and it would not really work very well. The idea of the workbook, as we see it, is it's something that teachers can dip into rather than work straight through. For example, as here, as you see, if you're writing composition on describing a character and you want a bit more work on that, you can dip into the workbook and pick that out. That is why we decided to keep them separate. I do realize that it does involve extra expense, but it's definitely worthwhile. It's also, I noticed that you come from Jamaica, as is Vivian, and you was asking for a workbook which mirrors the grade 3 curriculum. Of course, the books we're looking at today are the Pan-Caribbean workbooks, which are based on the OECS curriculum. I have to say that we do have Jamaica student books, language tree, which cover grades 4, 5, and 6, and Stop Press. We are in the process of getting ready for publication grades 1, 2, and 3 for Jamaica, because the Jamaican syllabus does differ from the OECS. So I do understand that if you are using these books, the Pan-Caribbean books, to teach in Jamaica, it doesn't match your syllabus exactly, but the future is bright in that sense. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Right. One thing which was really stressed in the new OECS syllabus is the importance of assessment. And the first thing is that we encourage self-assessment. We've looked at it a little bit already. The student self-assessment to monitor their progress. And these are some of the graphic organizers you will find at the back of the book. And as Leonie said, they can be applied to numerous exercises within the student book. There's a reading response chart. They give the title, text type, topic, theme, main ideas, how it relates to me. So it's a text to self relationship, and what I learnt or felt, and lists of some new words, and my opinion of the text. And there's also a short grid here for to prepare for a book report. And students have read something, they write title and author, setting, characters, plot, characters, what I thought of the book, and why. Can we have the next one, please? Yes, I think we might have looked at these already, but these are a way of assessing at the end of a lesson or the end of a unit. 3 things I learnt, 2 things I found interesting, would like to know more about, and 1 question I still have. And there's one at the bottom called an exit ticket, which the name at the top, and the exit ticket. And the first thing I will share when I get home is, and the next one is 1 thing I didn't understand. So it's asking the students to monitor their own progress and to be moving towards taking responsibility for their own learning. Can we have the next slide, please? Right, reflection as they go through the course is very important too. And we've already mentioned the journal. The journal is encouraged, they encourage students to keep a journal right from early days onwards. Talking to teachers, we found that teachers are already doing this, and we've got some ideas for what can go in the journal. It can be a report on daily activities, special events, notes about the stories and books you read, reflections about your schoolwork, how you could improve, and important achievements, for example, being selected for a school team. And you will find lots of little references to put this in your journal right throughout the book. The other reflective exercise is a detailed book report, and this I understand is part of the CPA. If you're doing that, those students have to produce a book report, and this is quite detailed from grade 5 about, and you'll notice actually there's a little turtle on the right hand side saying include book reports in your journal, so that's something you can put in, the students can put in their journal. And then there's guidelines and a little table for people to fill in to make notes for the report. And at the bottom of the page there are lots of suggestions which how they could present their book report. It doesn't just have to be a straight report. Some ideas: change a scene from the book into a play, prepare a timeline for the events, create a suitable cover for your book, role play an interview with a character, give a presentation about the book, write a poem or rap about the character. And that just makes it a bit more interesting than rather always having a straight book report. Right, can we have the next slide, please? And finally, we're coming on to formative assessment. And as you said, these are provided at the end of each unit. And just a quick recap of what the student has learnt, so you as teachers can monitor their progress, see what remedial work you need to do. And this is where the workbook could come in very useful, because, for example, in Unit 2, the second exercise is the indefinite article using a or an in front of these words. If you find that they haven't grasped that, you can use some exercises from the workbook to reinforce it. And the page on the right-hand side is from grade 5. As you can see, it's more advanced. And this one does actually have a listening exercise, which you would read out. And the second exercise is identifying cause and effect. It's a comprehension exercise. And it covers what was in the unit. I think that is our last slide as such. So we're going on to a thank you. And really, it's an opportunity to ask any questions. I've got another one here. Are the books more writer-friendly now in terms of students writing on the lines and erasing any mistakes they have made? The reason being, previously it was a challenge for students to write in the books or erase any mistakes they made. Well, as far as erasing, I would imagine that they would have to use a pencil if they're going to erase it. The workbooks have ample space for answers to be written. If it's a writing exercise, such as writing a letter, what we would ask them to do is to make their notes for the letter in the student book and then to write the letter on a separate sheet of paper, because this saves having a whole page full of blank lines. We would not expect the students to write in the student books. Do you want to say anything on that, Leonie?
Yes, I was wondering if so does that answer your question, Morticia? I was wondering if maybe you were saying that the spaces for the child to write on in the very early levels workbooks wasn't enough for them to write on, or the space between the lines wasn't large enough or something. But perhaps you can tell us if we haven't fully answered your question.
I've noticed another one popped up above that. I didn't see it before. Will they give exit tickets to the teacher? Maybe the teachers want to exit. I think the answer to that is that we are planning some resource materials, and one suggestion has been that we do put a copy online that you could download to photocopy. So that's the answer to that. I mean, you could probably design your own because it's not actually a very difficult feature to do.
Oh, I thought the teacher was saying...
Is there a third edition for Jamaica? Some of the features just shown are not in the second edition. Well, as far as Jamaica is concerned, we are still working on the first edition of... what was that? No, it was the second edition, wasn't it? We wrote an early edition based on an old syllabus. And about, how long ago? Was it about 6 years ago? We wrote a Jamaica-specific syllabus for grades 4, 5, and 6, student books and workbooks. Well, they were for Jamaica. And we are currently working on a third edition for Jamaica, so watch this space. So it will have... I've not seen one in St. Lucia. Where do you mean the third edition? Right. I think my school has some of the old editions. Will the new editions be available for this new school?
These are all questions really not for us, are they?
Yeah,
That's
I mean the
marketing department.
The Caribbean, the edition we've been looking at has been on the market for a while, so we'd really have to we'd have to consult the publisher about where they're available. Or
those who haven't seen it maybe would ask their local rep, or what do you think,
Catherine? What do you think on that one? Because
we would recommend to contact your local bookseller. I can send the link on our website, and that has a list for all of the booksellers. So if you haven't seen one, then I would recommend that you contact them.
Some of the people here today, you are using the third edition, I think, but some of you are not. So not everybody's managed to convert to it yet.
I wonder if you could tell us in the chat if you're using the second or the third edition. It would be interesting to know.
Somebody's just come and said they're using the second. There's quite a few.
A few people using the second.
Yeah.
I don't think the third edition is available in Belize yet, from what I've heard, but certainly it should be available in
Should
the
be
other
available in
countries.
Vincent and the Grenadines.
Yeah. There's a lot saying second.
Yes, yes. And when was that? When was the third edition published? About 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2 years ago. If you are interested in the third edition, I would recommend contacting your local bookseller. So that list that the link that I copied in the chat has a page of our booksellers by country. Or if you're not sure, just drop us a message or an email. Our contact details are on this page. So please do get in touch. I think we're going to have to close the session now, but thank you so much, Julia and Leonie. That was a brilliant presentation and lots of lovely messages coming through, which is great to see. As I mentioned earlier on, you will all be sent the recording, the slides and your certificate within 24 hours. So do check your inboxes for those. And we'll also be sending the recording and slides from yesterday's session, just in case you wanted to watch that. And please do come along to our session at the same time tomorrow. If you'd like, we'll be covering the new edition of English Matters with Julia. And the link to sign up to that is on our channels too. So hope to see you there. And thank you very much again, Julia and Leonie. And hopefully see you all very soon. And have a lovely day, everyone.